Good afternoon, everyone. It's Pastor Ted from Connect Church. Hope your afternoon is going well. I'm out in the garage again for this week's garage devotional. This week I have my coffee cup and my coffee with me. I don't know about you, but maybe when you watch this video, you might want to grab a cup of coffee, sit down, and join me with this time of this video. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been in a cave? I'm not talking about one like at Disneyland, but I'm talking about a cave or a cavern that reaches deep into a mountain. On several of our camping trips with my dad when I was younger, we went on guided tours of large caverns and large caves and walked through the cave system. And inevitably, in every one of those, when you got really far in and you hit the largest open spot, the largest cavern in that cave system, that they would have everyone stop, stand still, and they'd turn off the lights. And when the lights went off, it was pure, unrelenting darkness that you could feel it in yourself and feel it around you. And it seemed like the walls were closing in on us. And you just kind of wondered what was slithering around in the darkness. It was a unique experience. It was exciting to go see those caves and caverns. But maybe many of you or many other people may be feeling that way about sheltering in place. Or maybe we're struggling without success to see what the future looks like. The future is just dark, and what does that future look like? And will they be able to make it back, or will they have a job when they get back, or be able to pay the bills? And the list goes on of that type of feeling that how do we get out of this, can't see a way out. There's an account in the Old Testament, which is the first section of the Bible. It's made up in two sections. In 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 1 through chapter 19, verses 18. And it talks about the prophet Elijah when he confronts the king of Israel. Now the problem was the king of Israel had turned away from worship of the true God and then began to bring in all these false prophets and those that went with it and worship these false gods. And God had called Elijah to confront the king. So he goes to the king and he confronts him. And what it comes down to is they have this confrontation with the false prophets. And so they set up this contest that they would set up an altar, put wood on the altar, put the sacrifice on top of the altar, and the contest was whoever God answers by fire is the true God. There's 450 plus. There's actually was 850 false prophets. Maybe all of them was there, but at least 450 were there at that moment. And it's just Elijah. He's the only one standing up for God. And so they had this confrontation. The false prophets went first, and they did everything, and they just worked and worked and worked for hours and hours, and no fire. So Elijah finally says he's going to do it. Rebuilds the altar, and that puts it all together. And then he has water poured all over the wood and the sacrifice. And he began to pray, and just a few words into his prayer, fire came down and burned up the whole altar and the sacrifice, showing that God is the true God. Well, after that, Israel hadn't had rain for years, and Elijah prayed, and the rain came to bless them. And he told Ahab the king to get to Jerusalem before his chariot would get bogged down in mud. And so he goes back, but his wife Jezebel was furious. And she said that may it be to Elijah, as was the false prophets who were killed that day, may Elijah be killed by the very next day. And so Elijah began to run in fear away from her. And he runs all the way, and God sustains him through some angelic interventions. And he gets to a cave, and he goes inside the cave. This cave that he went inside was most likely the cave that Moses stood out the front of after he received the commandments of God, and the glory of God passed by him. But Elijah's there because he feels he failed. He believed that when God showed up, that part of his reason for having this confrontation was that the king and the queen would turn back to God and they would serve God and the nation would serve God, but they didn't. So he felt he was a failure. He had nothing to go forward with, nothing to live for. So as we pick it up, as he goes in the cave, he goes there defeated, fearful, without purpose, without direction, and with no hope. Do you feel like you're in a cave today? A cave of fear, lack of resource, lack of direction, or sickness, maybe the loss of hope. You're without a job, you're without a friend. You feel that you could just fill in the blank there, whatever you want that you might be feeling in your life. God led and supplied Elijah all the way to the cave. He was with him. Even though his sense of hopelessness and his sense of defeat and failure, he was with him. And when he gets to the cave, God asks him this question, what are you doing here, Elijah? Sometimes God asks us a question, what are we doing? What are we doing in the midst of this? And it makes us ask that question and think about it. Elijah gave a whole list of reasons why he was here and the reasons that he felt of all these different things, that he was zealous for God and he's the only one left. And he gave all these reasons why he was there. But God responded by telling him to come out of the cave. Sometimes our cave seems safer than coming out of the cave. Sometimes it just seems safer to stay where it is than to trust God and step out into what he's telling us to do. So God passed by the cave, it tells us, bringing this strong wind that tore rocks apart and tore the beginning of the mountain apart. But it says that God was not speaking in the wind. He was not there. Next, God sent a great earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake either. Then he sent a great fire, but God was not in the fire either. God is not always in the spectacular. God is not always in the dramatic. We need to be discerning so we don't look for God where he is not. Finally, God shows up in a low whisper. Or it can be translated more accurately, this, a sound of a thin silence. God showed up in the sound of a thin silence. And in other words, the space between breaths, God shows up and speaks. God shouts in the silence. That's that thin silence. God shouts in the silence many times around us. What is God saying to you in the thin silence today? Could Jesus be speaking to us, but we can't hear him because we're expecting him to show up in some dramatic and large way instead of just a whisper, a non-dramatic way? Maybe we have cluttered our lives with so much noise or fear that we are not listening for him in the silence, in the quiet moments, the between the breaths voice of God. In Psalm 46:10 through 11, we read, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob, our fortress." I encourage you to read the whole 46th Psalm and just read it daily this week and see what God's doing. Let me wrap it up by saying we need to be still in the midst of our struggles. Fear, be still in it, etc. And know that God is the God over everything. And he will not leave you alone or helpless or in any real or perceived failure. He will not leave you alone in those. We go on to see that Elijah was recommissioned to anoint the new king of Syria and the new king of Israel and to appoint the new prophet that would succeed him. Elijah's place. He finished his mission finally. Jesus has a plan. Jesus has a purpose. Jesus has a call and a mission for you. This symbolic cave is not the end of your story. God has written more for you and is calling you to step out of your cave. I encourage you to do that. This devotion is a little longer, but I just wanted to give you the whole picture. Step out of your cave days. Stop and find a place of quietness to hear God's voice. Be blessed. God is with you. He's going to do incredible things. Lord bless you today.